Today we are in Chapter 5, Lesson 1, and the category is What is Supply? Today's essential question is what are the basic differences between supply and demand? Supply is the amount of product that would be produced, grown, or acquired and offered for sale at all possible prices that could prevail in the market. Demand is how much buyers want of an item for service, sometimes through other factors that influence the different production. So when we're looking at supply, we're going to say the amount of product that will be produced, grown, or acquired that offered for sale at all possible prices that could prevail at market. We're also going to look at something called a supply curve. And what a supply curve is a graph that shows the quantity supplied at each and every possible price inside the market. They always have a positive slope. So for instance, on this side you see the price of cereal and the supply. At each price point, the supplier, the producer, will be willing to produce more or supply more as much as the price goes up. So for instance, on this example here, you see at $1, they're only willing to supply 10 units of cereal, but at $5, they're willing to supply 50 units. So it works in inverse to what the demand schedule would look like. So again, the supply schedule here, quantity goes up when the price increases, and the higher the price is an incentive for a producer to offer more, meaning that we'd be willing to invest more if we have more profits, if we're going to be able to sell things at a higher price and create more flexibility. So this is going to be an example of what a supply schedule is going to look like when we're graphing it on a curve. The supply schedule for the individual supply curve both show the quantity supplied at every possible price for a certain period of time, and it can change in the quantity supplied as it appears a movement along the supply curve. So over here we already have our supply schedule set up for you, and when we're looking at this again, we're using economic models, so it's not always completely exact, but what we're saying is here at $1 the company would not be willing to supply anything. As we move up, at the price, we're willing to supply or produce more than that in that range. So if we graph the chart, you see here we put the dots in, you'll be able to see again a positive slope with at $9 we're able to produce or willing to produce 4 units of quantity. At $6 we're willing to do 3.5. Well, how could you do 0.5? Again, this is a model, so that's just showing you the example of what we could do or what we would be willing to do. As the decrease in the quantity supplied as we go down, and there's an increase in quantity supplied on the move up as the price goes up. There's also something you have to look at called the market supply curve, and that's the supply curve that shows the quantities offered at various prices by all producers that are offer the product for sale in that given market. Another example here is we could plug it in from this perspective is this is what we'd be willing to supply at that price. So there is a change in quantity supplied, and the quantity supplied is the amount that a single producer or all producers bring to the market at any given price. This could be any type of item. This could be computers, this could be tennis shoes, this could be anything that you're looking at. The change in the quantity supplied is the change in the amount offered for sale in response to the change in price. So if we lower the prices, we're going to be willing to produce less of that item. Think about it as in seasonal changes. When you see the production of lawnmower equipment, you're going to see that in the spring. You're going to see that in the summer. Late summer, you're going to see it lower down as the price that we're willing to supply less because the demand is starting to decrease, and we're going to see the prices drop. So therefore, we're not going to create more products. We're going to phase that product line out as we move. Changes in supply also happen. Situations where suppliers offer different amounts of products for sale at all possible prices in the market. And there's a shift to the right if supply increases, so the whole line is going to move physically to the right, or a shift to the left if the supply decreases. So again, you're going to see physically less. So there are a lot of different factors that cause a change in supply. And what we're going to look at is the first thing is cost of resources. And a change in the cost of the productive inputs such as land, labor, and capital can cause a change in supply. Supply might be increasing because of lower costs of the inputs such as labor or packaging, enabling suppliers to produce more at every price, thereby shifting the supply curve to the right. An increase in the cost of inputs has an opposite effect. A higher cost of inputs would force producers to offer fewer products for sale at every price point, shifting the supply curve to the left. We could also have a factor that changes supply and productivity. Productivity increases whenever there's more output is produced with the same amount of inputs. When management trains or motivates its staff and workers, productivity usually goes up because more is produced with the same amount of inputs, resulting in the supply curve to shift to the right. But if workers fall behind in training, become unmotivated, or are unhappy, then productivity could decrease. Fewer goods will be produced at every possible price, shifting the supply curve to the left. You could also have changes in technology. The introduction of a new machine or industry process could lower the cost of production, which is increasing the productivity. For example, improvements in jet aircraft fuel efficiencies can lower the cost of a passenger service. When production costs go down, the firm can produce more at every possible price, thereby shifting the curve to the right. New technologies do not always work at first, of course, so we have to look at the supply curve as a brief shift to the left. However, firms expect new technologies to be beneficial in the long haul, or they would not have adopted them in the first place. There could also be a change in the number of sellers. So most markets are fairly active, with firms entering and leaving all the time. You often see this where you live, especially when your store closes and another one opens in its place. Whenever industry grows because firms are becoming in, the market supply can curve shift to the right. Or if the industry is shrinking because firms are leaving, fewer products are offered for sale at that same price as before, which shifts the market supply curve to the left. And finally, you could have consumer expectations. When you're talking about expectations, it can affect a decision that the firm makes. These expectations can refer anything from the cost of inputs to the demand of the firm's products. Unless we know more about these expectations, however, it's not possible to make the generalizations about which way the firm is going to supply the supply curve. A few more is taxes. Firms can view taxes as a cost of production, just like a raw material and labor. For this reason, this is why businesses almost always lobby for lower taxes. If a company pays fewer taxes, it can produce more goods at each possible price point, shifting the supply curve to the right. However, if a tax goes up, the production costs go up, and it's going to produce less at every price, thereby shifting that supply curve to the left. You also have subsidies, and a subsidy is a payment to an individual business or other to encourage or protect a certain type of economic activity. Today, many farmers in the milk, cotton, corn, wheat, sugar, and soybean industries receive subsidies to support their incomes, which shifts the supply curve of their products to the right. When the subsidies are repealed, production costs go up, and the firms will either leave the market entirely or produce less at each possible price point, something that shifts their supply curves to the left. And finally, we have government regulations. And government regulations, if the government decides to reduce regulations on a business, production costs go down, and the firms are able to produce more output at all possible prices, thereby shifting that individual supply curve to the right. More often, though, of course, government increases its regulation, which is a typical to business cost of production. For example, when the government requires new auto safety features such as airbags or emission controls in a car, it costs more for that auto manufacturer to produce. So therefore, manufacturers have to adjust their prices to the higher production costs by producing fewer cars at every possible price, shifting that market supply curve to the left. So again, this kind of just goes through to examples to looking and see the different reasons why we're going to have an actual physical movement, not movement along the supply line, which is looking at the actual supply schedule, but we're saying we're going to physically have a reason why we're going to move that supply curve to the left or to the right based off the changing dynamics.